Anyway, here I am. I'm very pleased to be here. It's an honor. Now I'm going to assume, I don't know how much any of you know about music publishing law or music rights in general, so I'd like to kick off by just going into sort of the anatomy of a musical copyright, because the concepts that we are going to discuss involve the underlying rights in a musical composition. So we all know, I'm sure, that there are two types of musical copyrights. There's sound recording copyrights and copyrights in musical compositions. And they're completely separate and distinct pieces of property, and they have their own different bundle of rights. I'm going to concentrate mainly on musical compositions. So musical composition is a copyrightable work once it's created. It's presumed owned by the creators. And it involves certain 6 basic rights. One is the right to make mechanical reproductions embodying that composition. So that's used to be the sale of records and CDs. Now it includes downloads. So it's sort of the permanent sale of the composition, of a representation of the composition. Of course, it has to be embodied in a sound recording for it to find its way into a reproduction in the first place. The second right is the synchronization right. That's the right to synchronize the musical composition with a visual image, most notably in films and television shows, but it can be as rudimentary as something playing during a slideshow. That's synchronized with a visual image. The third right is the public performance right, and there are 2 types of public performance rights. There's the grand performing rights and the small performing rights. The one that we are usually most familiar with are the small performing rights, which is the right to perform the composition publicly for profit, usually on the radio or television or in venues over a certain size, which are delineated within the copyright law. And these, some of you may be familiar with ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, which are the U.S. performing rights societies that act on behalf of the owners of the compositions, the music publishers, and the authors of the compositions, the songwriters, to be their licensing agents. So they are empowered to license these rights to radio stations and TV networks and venues, and they collect what are, they do blanket licenses for all of the repertoire that that particular society represents. And then the licensee, like a radio station, is required to log their performances or give some sampling of the songs that they play, and that data is transferred back to the society that uses a Byzantine and complex formula to divide up all the blanket license fees they have and distribute them to their writer and publisher members. And of all these rights, these are almost always paid directly to the writer and directly to the publisher. All the other rights, when the money's collected, it flows through the publisher, and then the publisher pays the writer, as with mechanical reproduction rights. The fourth right is the grand performing rights, which are the rights to dramatize, use a composition in a drama. When you're using a composition to further a narrative, that's called a grand performing right, and the most common usage is in a musical comedy or an opera. So when it's not just the performance of the song, but the performance of the song is embodied in some sort of show or narrative where the music is involved in moving it along, then that's called the grand performing rights. And those are not licensed by performing rights societies. Those are usually done with a deal between the composer and the producer of the particular musical, and the formulas for payment are completely different. Then the other right is the print right. The right to make sheet music, that's fairly self-explanatory. And then lastly, the right, as with any copyright of an artistic work, the right to materially alter the composition. This comes into play a lot when you're talking about like sampling, or somebody taking a little piece of a song and putting in another song. Well, you can't do it without the owner of the original composition's consent. If you do, it's copyright infringement. So those are the basic bundle of rights. Now, a music publisher's job is to administer and exploit all these rights. And so most publishing companies have they divide the functions up into different departments. So it's the administration department, which is to register the work or renew the copyright if in the days when copyrights had to be renewed, or recapture copyrights. If you're usually a publisher is the one having the copyright recaptured from them, because under the most recent version of the copyright law, the Sonny Bono Term Extension Act, after the initial term and the renewal term are over, plus a certain number of years, the original author of the work can cause the copyright to revert to him as long as it was not a work made for hire. So in the original songwriter agreement that the songwriter signed and gave 100% of the copyright to the music publisher back in the 50s or 60s or whatever, now after those, because when that was done, the term of copyright was 2 terms of 28 years, and now it's been extended to 85 years, or life of the artist plus 50 years. And so the Congress determined that, well, why should the publishers get the windfall of the term extension when the songwriters or their heirs should be able to participate in this as well, and as a way of setting right what were some inequitable contracts at the time. And that's kind of a hot area right now, or it has been for quite a while, of recapturing copyrights. And in representing estates and things like that is something we do a lot. Now, so that's one of the administrative functions of a music publisher. The other is to preserve and organize it. A lot of times they'll hire a copyist to make sheet music, and they'll have a library so it's all accessible. And then they set up the paperwork if somebody needs a license to use the work, let's say a synchronization license, as we talked about, to put it in a movie. They'll have a licensing department that negotiates and issues the license. And their main administrative function of a music publisher is collecting the money, right? Because you have all these people that are recording a song and releasing them every which way now on the internet, and you know, download, streaming, little independent labels all over the world. So the main job of a publisher is to find out, okay, where is the money, basically, that's sort of divided usually into domestic collections and foreign collections. In domestic collections, there's a organization that's been around for many years called the Harry Fox Agency, which acts as like ASCAP BMI do for performing rights, but they do it for collecting mechanical rights. And they represent, their activities also fund the main lobbying organization for the Music Publishers Organization, which is the National Music Publishers Association. And because they represent so many copyrights, they have the clout to go in and audit record companies to make sure that they're getting a fair count on the number of units that have been reported as sold. And that's one reason to use them. They charge a fairly hefty commission for their collection activities, however. So some major publishers have elected not to use them to do their own mechanical licensing, and it's not that difficult to do oneself, because you just issue one piece of paper, a mechanical license, and then you get royalty statements from the person to whom you've issued the license, and that's all. You get, it's mailbox money. Of course, you have to account to your songwriters from the money you collect. And usually, the traditional in traditional songwriter agreements, monies were split 50-50. With respect to domestic administration, for mechanical royalties, it's pretty easy. Then the publisher will affiliate with whatever performing rights society is affiliated with the songwriters in their catalog. So if their catalogs, if their catalog is written by writers who are members of all 3 societies, then the publisher will affiliate with all 3 societies, and they will receive their performing rights royalties from the performing rights societies. They'll maybe issue sheet music or have a sheet music company print up sheet music and collect the money from them. Now, with respect to foreign collections, unless one is a multinational corporation, one usually has to go on a territory-by-territory basis to find a publisher in each territory that has a good reputation for collecting monies there. And that sub-publisher, they're called, right, collects the money on behalf of your copyrights, takes a collection fee off the top, and sends you the rest of the money, which is then distributed by the publisher, part of which is distributed again to the songwriter. Now there's some mini regional publishers can represent all of the EU, for instance, or the Benelux countries, or South America. It doesn't have to be country by country. And what some independent publishers do is that they will go with a multinational, like a BMG or a Universal or a Sony, to administer their copyrights outside of the U.S. So that's like that's called a sub-publishing agreement with a major. Then the other major kind of function of administrative function of a publisher is to audit. So, and then oftentimes usually one is auditing record companies, because that's the mechanical royalties flow through the record companies, which is not, that's just the way it evolves. It's something that publishers have never been very happy about, because it allows record companies to hold on to the money for an extra 6 to 18 months. And holding on to money is capitalization. And the money doesn't always flow through the snake, so to speak. We've done audits for legacy artists, and we'll go in and our auditor will find, say, $50,000 in 20 minutes, right? In like an account that's called unmatched funds, right? That's like money came in from Japan, right? And the catalog number for the record was different than the US catalog number. So, we didn't know whose money this was, right? So, well, that's because you have to look it up, right? Somewhere. Right? And our auditor, when the record company guy was out of the room, looks at the bottom of the column of this unmatched funds column, and there's a couple different accounts like this that are played with. There was $20 million in that account, okay, at any given time. I mean, for business, that's capitalization. I mean, it doesn't have to be segregated, it doesn't have to bear interest, it sits there. You pay it when you have to pay it, basically. So audits are very important. And then issuing royalty statements to one's royalty participants and songwriters, sounds pretty straightforward, but, I mean, I've represented gangster rap labels where, they turn in the song and there's like 28 songwriters on one song, all claiming 30%, and that can get kind of complicated. But and they all say, "Where's my money?" And then we talked about copyists and librarians. So that's just the administration function, and that's that's kind of a dry area, I suppose. Although it can get sexy if you're finding stuff that people are hiding from you. Now the exploitation side, that's sort of the creative side of music publishing companies, is their job is to secure exploitations for their copyright. So whether that involves many things: getting a recording artist to record your song, getting a director to use the song, or a music supervisor to put the song in a film or TV show. If there's a good commercial use for the song, to have it be put in a commercial, and those are very lucrative, but one has to be careful because it can demean the copyright in some way, sometimes depending on what it's used for. And that's an issue in songwriter-publisher agreements of how much control the artist or the writer wants to maintain over whether the company will have the right to issue commercials licenses, or whether they'll require the writer's consent. And then to create situations that will result in more performances on the air is something that the creative force is also mindful of. Sometimes they will take a body of work that's in their catalog and try to have a musical comedy commissioned and written that will embody that material. And in a case like with a Gershwin catalog or something like that, that can be very, very lucrative for a copyright that is aging and is maybe just an evergreen, but slowly tapering off. Having represented artists that are like kind of evergreen artists or legacy artists, their royalties were always fairly constant for many, many years. Not huge, but you could always pretty much count on them. we've seen those earnings decline by 70%, you know, over the last 15 years or so. And it's just, and there's nothing, you know, nothing has replaced it yet. The streaming hasn't replaced it, the licensing hasn't replaced it. So you have to constantly be thinking of ways to keep your material fresh and to find new uses of it so that new audiences are introduced to these great songs and this great music. And that's part of the creative staff's job. You know, these days, a very lucrative area of exploitations is in video games and in ringtones and in toys. We represent George Thorogood, and my partner, who's represented him for decades now. You go in his office, and it is filled with plush toys that, if you push it, play bad to the bone. You know, all these badass plush toys. But it's a lucrative area, and that, you know, that's an interesting, you know, it's sort of a commercial use. But look, again, it's like a mechanical reproduction, isn't it? Because each one of those toys plays the song, just like a record. Forgive me if I use the word record, but that's just, you know, the way it's brought up, and I can't change. Okay, so the other part of the creative side, and then foreign translations, you know, if you have a good sub-publisher, or if you're a multinational and you have good, you know, good foreign offices, you want them to get local artists to record the songs that are popular here and possibly have translations done into the native languages of those songs. And, you know, that's tricky as to, one maintains the right to approve all translations.
Are those successful?
Oh yeah, well, you know, a successful song is successful everywhere. You know what I mean? I mean, yes, people want to hear Yesterday sung in Spanish. You know, I mean, or what? I mean, it depends on the material, but it's often, you know, if it's a catchy tune, yes. But there's a trick to translations; it has to be artful itself. So what like the artist repertoire, the development, talent, staff of a music publishing company are called professional managers. And they work with the songwriters that are signed to the company, and they usually fall into different categories of songwriter. There's the artist songwriter that just writes their own material. There's the just sort of the journeyman working songwriter that crafts tunes and other people record them and exploit them. And then there's the producing songwriter. Producers are, you know, very sought after by music publishers because they're not betting on just one horse then. You know, a producer will maybe work on 4 or 5 records in a year, so, you know, maybe only one of them hits, but that's plenty enough, right? And then you have these are, not all producers co-write with their artists, but many of them do. And so when, you know, those are the most desirable to music publishers because they're writing with a lot of different artists, and you know, there's a lot of opportunities for success that way. With artists, usually they don't wind up getting a publishing deal until after they have a record deal of some kind, and it's usually not worth it for them to enter into a publishing deal because the money won't be good enough compared to the rights they'd have to give up. And those deals with self-contained artists are purely more like banking deals than a pure songwriter agreement, because the professional staff doesn't have to get the songwriter to write songs for an artist to record. The artist wants to record, he's going to write songs for himself. So they're more like a banking arrangement where the artist is, you know, they see that the artist has released a record, it's already in the charts, there's money in the pipeline, right? There's money that's out there that has yet to be collected, and they want to collect it. They want to get their hands on it, right? And hold on to it for as long as they can before they have to give it up, right? And so that's just a calculation a music publisher makes. Okay, you know, they look at reports of how many downloads have taken place, how many records have sold, what the performance, you know, initial performance income looks like, and they usually base how much they want to offer the artist, because usually they'll offer the artist in advance to sign, money up front, for what's usually a co-publishing deal, which is basically a 75-25 split. 75 of the royalties go to the writer and 25 are retained by the music publisher, but there's a lot of variations to those deals, whether the copyright is split, whether it's held 100% by the publisher, whether it's retained 100% by the writer. With artists and music publishers, there's a nice relationship there, but the artist is not relying on the music publisher for co-writes, or rarely is that the case. Is there like a creative reliance by the artist on the music publisher? And a lot of writers even themselves complain that, well, they're the ones that get all their collaborations, and music publishers don't do that much. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, there's some very dedicated and talented, well-respected professional managers in music publishing that can be very effective for setting up co-writes and other opportunities for songwriters. And so if one's representing a songwriter or an artist or producer, one really has to evaluate a deal in terms of, well, what does this person need to thrive as a creative person? Okay, obviously everybody needs money, right? But do they need some guidance, and are they capable of receiving it? Or are they just somebody who needs the money collected for them? Do they need help networking with people? Okay, well, that's something to consider. The other thing is that people don't realize that musicians and artists, they don't get much opportunity to diversify their holdings and investments. Sometimes a music publishing deal is a way to take money out of one's music career, right? Buy a house, invest it in something other than the music business. What a thought, right? Artists want, oh, let's put all in your career and all that. But, it doesn't hurt, if you're counseling a client in these areas, to think about, well, how are they going to put their kids through school? They look really cool now, but are they always going to look this cool? You want to make sure they've got something put away. You got something that's going to be making money for them even when they're fat and, bald or, whatever. I mean, that's something to consider. And these days, with streaming and the way the record business is, artists are more and more reliant on showing up and playing. They're more and more reliant on making money by performing, and less mailbox money, and less first of all, I have to, disclaimer here, I am very pro-copyright, right? And to that end, I'm very against the technological industry that's mounted what I think is a very successful propaganda campaign against creative people and the music industry in particular. And they justify it with words like free, and the internet should be free, and it's going to stop entrepreneurialism if you have to pay for music. Darn right it is. I went to a panel. I was sort of sent there as a heckler to a internet radio panel, and all these guys from Rhapsody and Spotify, on the panel. And they're all, talking about how great their service is and how versatile, how all this great music and what they can do, and there's curated playlists and branded playlists, and this, that, the other. I think, oh, branded playlists. Writer never sees any of that. Curated playlists. Oh, they never see any of that. And they're all kind of acted like they were a little bit embarrassed, right? That they were able to do this for so little, having to pay so little money. But these were like the good guys, right? On this panel. And, it was really apparent that the whole business model for that industry is based on getting music for dirt cheap, and the fact is that there's no reason for anybody to have to pay for music anymore. You can get it for free legally with Spotify, Rhapsody. I mean, okay, can you find, Roland Kirk's I Talked with the Spirits? And they're probably not, but, pretty much everything else and more is always available. So, that industry, they say, oh, well, it's going to come. And then they'll try and create interesting warfare. Well, you're not getting any money because the record companies are taking it all. No, they're not. The record companies are making way less money than they ever made before. It's just, you know, it's... Anyway, I don't mean to digress, but I want to be full disclosure on whose side I am.